I'm Sally Sears, a founding director of the South Fork Conservancy. We're a group building low impact hiking trails along the tributaries of Peachtree Creek here in Atlanta. And to do that, we needed a lot of community support. Our first project is the 5 miles between the Beltline in Buckhead and Emory University. We found two really important champions to help us with our work, engaging the community and helping to knit the community together along these hiking trails. Those two champions, a butterfly and a tree, each turned out to be catalytic change agents that we were able to help build our trails with. We began in Atlanta public school classrooms with volunteers showing elementary students how to grow American chestnut trees from seeds. The dramatic history of the loss of the native chestnut captured the classroom and the students' parents' imaginations too. Boy Scouts transplanted those seedlings onto trails along the South Fork of the creek, and more volunteers from our partners with the American Chestnut Foundation cleared a hillside for planting advanced hybrids along the creek. In a minute, we're going to show you how those saplings are faring. But the partnerships, though, help to share the news of our restoration work far beyond the reach of the creek. Let me introduce you to Mark Stokes, one of the folks who helped us begin this project.
Thank you, Sally. My name is Mark Stokes with the Georgia chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. And the American chestnut tree, to give you a little background, was a hardwood tree of the eastern forests. And at one time, it comprised as many as 4 billion trees throughout the native range, from north to south, from Maine all the way to Georgia. About 1906, a fungus that was actually introduced on Asian chestnut trees was brought to America and devastated almost the entire range. And by 1960, almost, of these 4 billion trees, almost all of them were completely eliminated from the environment. And the reason the tree was so important, number one, being a nut tree, it provided food for both wildlife and people as well. And of course, for pioneers, they utilized the chestnut tree for wood. It's very rot resistant, almost as rot resistant as a redwood tree. So it was important, I guess, on a sociological and a ecological level as well. And its loss, I guess you can still say the eastern forests are still recovering from the loss. The animals, anything that was big enough to eat a chestnut would rely on it as a food source. And the American Chestnut Foundation, our goal is to breed a American chestnut tree that can be restored to these eastern forests, to its native range. And we have divided the Chestnut Foundation into state chapters, and there's about 13 state chapters now. So I'm with the Georgia state chapter. And because the range of the American chestnut was so extensive, we rely really on volunteers to help, guide this effort to restore the chestnut tree. In order to restore the American chestnut tree, it's important to work with other organizations such as the Monarch Collaboration. We've worked with the Monarch Collaboration and Sally Sears to plant chestnut trees along the South Fork of Peachtree Creek. And if you go out on those trails, you'll see some of our plantings we did back in 2013, I think was our original plantings. If you'd like to see some of the chestnut trees that the American Chestnut Foundation has developed, you can take a stroll down the South Fork Trail or further upstream at Herbert Taylor Park, which is a little bit closer to Emory. And we have some plantings of chestnut trees there that you can see. If you'd like to see some of our larger plantings where the trees are actually thriving, those are mostly in our breeding orchards at this time, which if you'd like to see those, from time to time, we have volunteer events such as plantings, controlled pollinations, harvest sessions. So I encourage all of you to attend those from time to time. We have a Facebook site which we post when those events are going to be available. And next, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague from the Georgia chapter, John French.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it very much. That was very kind of you to introduce the topic of the American Chestnut Foundation. I'm with TACF, the American Chestnut Foundation, Georgia chapter. John French. I'm a professional plant pathologist, meaning I know about plant diseases, and I'm particularly interested in forest diseases, which fits right in to the Chestnut Foundation objectives. TACF was established 3.5 decades ago for the purpose of restoring, that is, the American chestnut to the eastern forest ecosystem. As you all know, it was decimated by a disease. About 120 years ago, this disease entered North America by way of the port of New York, and it spread through a 50-year period all the way through the natural range of American chestnut. And that extends all the way from Maine in the northeast to Mississippi in the southeast. The natural range of American chestnut was decimated. Decimated meaning that 9 out of 10 original trees were killed by this fungal disease. In that time period, we lost genetic diversity. We lost the ability to produce trees for reforestation. We lost genotypes, meaning their genetic makeup was lost in the process, not only killing the trees, but we lost the genetic makeup of the species. So what is TACF going to do about it? One of the most intriguing and most interesting and most promising initiatives of the American Chestnut Foundation has been to fund a program for biotechnology, by way of biotechnology to instill resistance, genetic resistance in the native species. I'll back up a little bit here and talk about some of the other programs that have been used. Back in the early parts of the last century, the early 1900s, there was a very extensive program undertaken by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to crossbreed American chestnut with Chinese chestnut. The thinking was that we would bring in genes from the Chinese species and mix them with the American species and thereby come up with a resistant population. Well, unfortunately, we brought in all those genes for those crossbreeds and we back crossed them to American chestnut with the hope of instilling those and keeping those genes for resistance. Unfortunately, I mentioned a lot of genes here. Genes meaning the DNA, the genetic makeup of the species. By bringing in these Chinese chestnut genes, we introduced approximately 15,000 genes from outside of North America. So anyone who's concerned about gene transfer, gene mixing, that's the worst case. It's a 50-50 gene transfer between the Chinese species and the American species. So now with biotechnology, we have the chance, we have the opportunity to be much more precise in the methods by which we instill resistance. And the genetic composition that I'm talking about is to bring in a mechanism to detoxify the fungus which causes chestnut blight. Now, anyone who is interested in chestnut, interested in the American Chestnut Foundation, should really kind of take this to heart because it's quite important for people who are involved to understand what they're doing. We're not just bringing in some biochemical trait here for our pleasure. We're doing this to repopulate the species. And the only way that we can actually do this is by having people committed to the project, which will disseminate this trait, will spread this trait by way of cross-pollination. We use volunteers. All of our people are volunteers. We don't pay anyone. This is a voluntary organization. And we actually do conduct cross-pollination. We do it with Chinese chestnut pollen. We do it with hybrid pollen. And we're going to do it with oxalate oxidase pollen when it becomes available to us, when the federal agencies deregulate it. And that's key, to be able to detoxify it. Detoxify means to eliminate the toxin that the disease-causing fungus uses to infect its host tree. And that toxin is called oxalic acid. This fungus that causes chestnut blight secretes the general toxin oxalic acid into the live tissues of the tree and kills those tissues in advance of invasion. To be able to prevent that, if we use this precision biotechnology, inserting a single gene to detoxify oxalic acid, we make the tree resistant. We make it able to resist the infection by the fungus. Now that's key because our colleagues at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, in particular, Dr. Bill Powell, has studied this mechanism of virulence by the fungus and resistance by the host. And over the course of about 30 years, he has derived this method by bringing a single gene from wheat, which is an edible species, into American chestnut, so as to cause the American chestnut then to become resistant to chestnut blight. Anyone who's concerned about this specific enzymatic system should look into the occurrence of this enzyme system. It's everywhere. It's everywhere in wild species and agricultural species. The oxalate oxidase enzyme that detoxifies oxalic acid is ubiquitous. Unfortunately, it's not in American chestnut. So that's our mission, to bring this trait of oxalate oxidase into American chestnut, thereby to repopulate the species through its entire range. Thank you.
The chestnut tree's popularity is matched in a lot of ways by the popularity of the monarch butterfly. Many of us know about the decline in numbers of the migrating monarch and want to do something to help bring back this popular butterfly. So that's how we came to be a partner with the folks who are growing native Georgia milkweed from seeds. Again, we started in classrooms, but we also included senior centers to get some generational growth, broadening to several ages and abilities to experience growing and transplanting 2 different species of milkweed into every public park we could find along the creek. They volunteered to water and photograph the growth and track the return of the monarchs flying back through Georgia to winter in Mexico. And now let me introduce you to the folks who helped us get that program going. Lisa Kiley with Monarchs Collaborations.
Thank you, Sally. I'm Lisa Kiley, founder of Monarch Collaborations. In 2019, we started a new project, Monarch Collaborations, where we brought people from retirement communities and children from elementary schools together through the milkweed seed. And we were very excited to have Henning von Schmeling and the Chattahoochee Nature Center with Sally Sears of South Fork Conservancy bring to us the milkweed seeds. We had 2 varieties, and our exciting opportunity was to bring these 2 generations together, to work together in the same space in real time and have a shared purpose and a shared project. So best laid plans, we were thinking that every month that the 2 would be able to get together and check out their progress. Well, the public school system, for good reasons, has very good safety measures, and it's hard to have people coming into the schools. And the communities where the active older adults are living have calendars scheduled out months in advance. So getting transportation to go back and forth was challenging. So what we did was we started bringing the information together via email and connecting people in each community to talk about what we were doing. So we started by bringing all of the organizations together at Woodland Elementary School. So we had several different retirement communities and elementary schools together, learning from Henning von Schmeling from the Chattahoochee Nature Center. He brought the seeds for us and taught us how to sprout them. He taught us about the cycle of the monarch and what was going to be happening, why the milkweed was very important. And we had a day and a half of learning about the milkweed. So everybody went back to their different organizations, excited with their little plants, and then brought together a lot of different champions in each area and certain classrooms in the schools who championed the milkweed. And while it was a very exciting process for everybody, it was also disappointing for many because the conditions weren't right for the milkweed to grow. So some places the seedlings were like this. We got them in January, and by April they were just very, very small. And some had big growing ones. And the Chattahoochee Nature Center had these fabulous milkweeds. So when it came time to plant in April, we had a number of different locations that we were working to plant in urban and rural gardens. We had a number of South Fork parks where we were planting. And the flagship program was partnered with Park Prescription Day, DeKalb County Board of Health. We partnered with DeKalb County Board of Health for Park Prescription Day. And on that day, we all met at Mason Mill Park with our plants and our shovels and our water and our stakes and our signs to mark the milkweed. And we planted 2 different varieties of milkweed throughout Mason Mill Park. We had a number of volunteers coming from the different organizations that we had fostered the plants from, as well as having a number of people who had heard about the program and who were excited about the program coming in and volunteering to help plant the plants, as well as volunteering to come out and water them, monitor them, and watch to see what happened with the monarch when it laid its eggs, when the caterpillars came out, and when the monarchs came back. Through this program, we discovered that the monarch is the great equalizer. Doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter where you grew up, it doesn't matter what you studied in school. Everybody loves the monarch butterfly. And anytime you look at a butterfly, you smile. Anytime you think about a butterfly, you smile. And so what we learned from that was we needed to expand our reach, because this was something that was going to be like the Grateful Dead. People were going to come and share their stories about monarchs and their love of monarchs. So that's what we did. We started a walk with the monarchs every month, and we started bringing people in the community together. So that was 2019. This year, we plan to do the same thing, exactly with more emphasis on the intergenerational education. And then COVID happened. And so we hit a standstill and weren't sure what we were going to do, and then decided that we needed to make this a virtual sale. And so we brought all of the milkweed plants out to Zonalite Park. They were advertised on Facebook, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. So we went to everyone. And so now we had people from all over coming to pick up milkweed. And we had people coming dressed in their monarch skirts and jewelry, and their hair was the color of monarch, and they were telling the stories about being in Mexico and seeing the monarchs. So it just was fabulous. And we learned that this is the great equalizer, this milkweed and the monarch. So this year we added 5 new parks, and we reached 18 different zip codes. We were able to sell 450 plants, which was much more than last year. We had 100 plants. And we have people checking in, sending pictures and telling us stories about the monarchs, their sightings, their plants, asking questions about them. And everybody's invested in the success of the plants and the monarch. And as a result, there's a greater sense of community and love and engagement in our parks and in our schools and in our retirement communities. And now it's my great fortune to introduce Henning von Schmeling, the man who knows everything about milkweeds and monarchs. You are going to enjoy his talk.
Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on this panel here with all these other wonderful people. Want to talk a little bit about milkweeds and connections to monarchs and how important they are to the environment, the ecosystem, and the species as such. over the years, landscapes in the U.S. have changed dramatically. We've lost many, many thousands and thousands of acres of potential insect, butterfly habitat throughout the United States. And therefore, the numbers have plummeted. And we've seen that very, very specifically in a species called the monarch butterfly, is a beautiful butterfly. If you haven't seen one, orange and black. It is a species of butterfly that migrates from Mexico, comes into the US, starts breeding in the spring, goes all the way up north. Successive generations go further and further north. And then this time of the year, the first wave comes down and they're still breeding, they're still laying eggs. And then the generation that is produced from those, from the highest number, are the ones that fly all the way to Mexico. So you can imagine that all along the way, there are issues with this. There are cars, there are storms, there are freezes, there's lack of milkweed, there's lack of nectar sources. You can plant all the milkweed plants you want, but really not benefit pollinators and butterflies as such if you don't also plant all of the associated plants, the pollen producers, the nectar producers. Planting trees and shrubs for shelter is another important thing. So basically, you can recreate a small little habitat in your backyard, along public trails, almost anywhere. Any 10 to 50 square feet can easily be turned into a wonderful habitat for pollinators and other animals that would then utilize those areas as well. So one of the things I always get asked is, where can you get milkweeds? So milkweeds, I've started growing a lot of milkweeds about 8 to 10 years ago. It probably came to the highest level about 3 years ago, where we grew anywhere from about 30 to 50,000 plants a year to be given out or sold to different organizations, to other nature centers, to private individuals for their yards. So with milkweeds and growing milkweeds this year, it has been a little bit different. As you noticed, we are in a virtual environment currently, and it may be like this for quite some time, but we still were able to grow milkweeds. We had some staff dedicated to that. We were able to have an online plant sale, and it worked out great, and we were able to get plants out. So if you are not in the Atlanta area, we're not equipped to ship. There are many other nurseries throughout the Southeast that grow milkweeds as well. I'm not the only one. If you go onto the State Botanical Gardens website here in Athens, or out of Athens, they have an initiative called the Georgia Native Plant Initiative. And on that page, you will find all the different native plant nurseries in the Southeast that grow native plants for pollinators and have milkweed plants. And you can order from them. It might be even in your town, in your city where you live, or it could be that they do mail order. So the neat thing about all of this, that's one plant or a group of plants, and the butterfly can do, is actually connect communities. So when people come together and pick up those plants and they get excited, and Lisa told me that there were people that were dressed up in costumes and had monarch prints on their shirts. I mean, that really builds excitement. And I want us to also not forget that we want to have these plants and these butterflies be basically the gateway for people to want to do more, because monarchs and milkweeds will not save the environment or do anything. It's the whole ecosystem that we need to work on and protect and enjoy and learn about. So I've really enjoyed being on this panel, and we would love to entertain questions about chestnuts and monarchs and milkweeds. So I welcome any questions that you might have.